more and more researchers, peer-reviewed articles are discovering that we are not unlike animals. Animals have emotions, they have families, they have social structures, they have wants, they have needs. We
Mm.
call it sentience in
Yes.
animal law world.
Mm.
And a lot of laws that are now being passed for animals are in recognition that animals have the ability to feel, to suffer, to
Mm.
experience joy. I mean, any of us that have companion animals know right off the bat that we share a lot more with animals than we don't. There is this tendency, though, us versus them. I mean, we're still having conflicts with our own species. I mean, we
Yeah.
have what 2 billion people now are living in conflict zones in the world.
Mm.
We have more conflicts and wars right now than we ever have had since World War II. We have a
Mm.
long ways to go with our own species,
Mm.
but we're slowly starting to understand that animals are in many ways very similar to ourselves.
Hey, Kimberly,
Hi, Frank. How are you?
where are you sitting as we speak?
I'm in my home in Florida.
But you work for a law company somewhere. Did I read right that it was out of the Washington, D.C.?
You sure did. I'm at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman. It's an international law firm, and I'm out of the DC office. I work in the fields of tax and finance. Although animal law, of course, is my passion.
Yeah, no, I got that. It's such an interesting bio that I just wanted to make sure I had it right, that this is all the same person.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so anyway, we'll get into this thing properly in a minute, but I just wanted to say that the book is magnificent, and I have a lot of quotes I'm going to dive into to draw out some questions that I have and answers from you. But I'm curious, how long a project was it, start to finish? Because it's just kind of an unbelievable volume. You brought everything into it. I really like the book a lot.
I appreciate that. It probably started with a keynote address that I gave in Oxford in the UK in
Yeah,
2018. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been sort of buried in research, not
yeah,
just in the United States, but in countries around the world to get a comparative view of how laws are looking in the United States.
yeah.
So I would say a good 5 years to pull it all together.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. Well, listen, I'm going to introduce you properly, um, as best I can anyway, and then we will dive in. So let me just start by saying that I am Frank Schaeffer, and this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, my podcast. And it is a live event on YouTube and some other places, and then goes everywhere podcasts go. It can be watched again or listened to later. And my guest today is Kimberly C. Moore. And Kim is, do people call you Kimberly or Kim? I want to,
Kim is fine. Either is okay.
okay. The problem is I have both Kimberlys and Kims in my life as friends, so I don't know how to do this. Kimberly is a nationally recognized tax attorney, director of public relations for Fur Free Society, Inc., and has worked on state legislation to ban sale and manufacture of fur. An animal rights activist, I guess, is the best way to describe her. Appointed as a fellow by the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics for outstanding contribution to the field of animal ethics worldwide. Author of The Case for Legal Protection of Animals, Humanity's Shared Destiny with the Animal Kingdom, which I just finished reading this morning and have quotes from that I'm going to be going through with Kim in a minute. Housekeeping, please subscribe to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Apple Podcasts and to my Substack, It Has to Be Said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com. So Kimberly, before we get into the book, let's talk about the book a little bit itself. You started writing this and you gave this keynote address. The book has a lot of footnotes, a lot of material, refers to a lot of people. It sort of feels like a kind of lifetime magnum opus. And I know you do a ton of other stuff and you're successful in the field of law. So just before we get into the content of the book, let's talk about just the making of this book itself in your life and how that has all happened for you.
Well, animal law is relatively new. As late as 2001, there were only 9 classes in the United States at law schools that actually taught animal law. Today, there's over 100 classes at prestigious universities, including Yale, Harvard, Michigan. And so I have been learning animal law over the last couple decades as it has been developing. It has really taken off tremendously. It's the most rapidly developing field of law there is. Animal law was not even recognized 3 decades ago. And
Yeah,
so much is happening. The fields of animal cognition and intelligence is absolutely exploding.
yeah.
And that is fueling this brand new area of animal law. And it's incredible how rapidly laws are developing, not just in the United States, but abroad. Every country, even Lebanon, just
Mm.
recently enacted its first anti-cruelty law. So there's tremendous great things happening for animals in the law, although we have a very long way to go.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit on the personal side of your background. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I grew up in an evangelical subculture. My parents were missionaries and pastors. I was part of the religious right back in the 70s and 80s. I'm 72 now. From about late 1980s forward, I journeyed out of that environment. But of course, it colors my thinking. So, for instance, one of the quotes I pulled out of your book is, various religions' point of view on animals, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the reason I center on that is because of who I am, my own history, my background. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I help with childcare for children. So right away, I zero in on something in your book about the correlation between child abuse and animal abuse. We all bring our personal baggage. So before we get into the book, I'm not, I don't want to push for things you don't feel like talking about. But what is your personal background that first brought you to this subject so passionately? Because your book is passionate, even though it is wonderfully dispassionate and academic, it nevertheless is passionate. And I love the book, but who are you? How did you get here? What's the background that brought you to this subject? Because there's a hell of a lot of work in this book, and obviously this is not a casual thing for you. So how did you get there? How does this start? Like when you're a child, parents, interests, your
Well,
favorite dog?
I have always loved animals tremendously. So
Yeah.
even though I'm in tax and finance, all of my pro bono work has centered around animals, animal organizations, their tax exempt status. I've worked with international organizations. And so it has been a long time coming. I, like so many other people, came to understand how animals are treated through social media, through
Mm,
documentaries. And it really is sort of when you take the lens off of how extensively we use and exploit animals, it
mm,
really is life-changing. And
mm.
so as I ventured down doing more pro bono work for animals, it quickly became apparent that animals are treated as property. I mean, every legal system since the dawn of millennia, animals are property. They're not
Yeah.
people. They're just things. And a lot of attorneys struggle with that. A lot of judges struggle with that
Mm.
because animals are so much more to us. And
Yes.
we have such a much more meaningful relationship with our companion animals. And
Mm.
so I was drawn to animal law because it is in the very infancy of what is going to become a massive field of law that's going to change the world for animals in time.
Yeah, and I think that your book is going to become one of the kind of door stoppers on this. And I mean that as a compliment because it's a substantial work. And I would guess that, anyone who's doing serious work in this field, not just in the law, but on the sides of ethics and so forth, that this is going to become one of the reference books for just about everyone in the field. Let me jump in and read something from your book here, and then I'll cite the page number. Dismantling systems of oppression that seek to legitimize us versus them. Constructs is critical to every rights movement, but it is especially important for the movement to legally protect animals because animals are the quintessential them. The us versus them tactic can be found in the playbook of every repressive system in history. And I think that's from page 176. So let's just start there, because I think if I was choosing a paragraph to put on the paperback version of this book when someday it's priced within the range that all of us can afford, I think I'd stick that on the cover, because that really jumped out at me as incredibly informative and also kind of describes your basic position. So let's start with that quote.
Because we are discovering, more and more researchers, peer-reviewed articles are discovering that we are not unlike animals. Animals have emotions, they have families, they have social structures, they have wants, they have needs. We call it sentience in
Yes.
animal law world.
Mm.
And a lot of laws that are now being passed for animals are in recognition that animals have the ability to feel, to suffer, to experience joy. I mean, any of us that have companion animals know right off the bat that we share a lot more with animals than we don't. So, I mean, there is this tendency, though, us versus them. I mean, we're still having conflicts with our own species. I mean, we have what 2 billion people now are living in conflict zones in the world. We have more conflicts and wars right now than we ever have had since World War II. We have a long ways to go with our own species, but we're slowly starting to understand that animals are in many ways very similar to ourselves.
Yeah, and actually in your book, I mean, I'm not going to go there right now, but one of the little quotes I pulled out just because it interested me was this quote in the book about the conflict in Ukraine at this moment and what that has done to biodiversity in Ukraine and to animals and so forth. A tremendous book. Let me just mention something. I hope this is okay with you, but I was so taken with the book that I called my producer and I said, can we include this in my book club? I have a book club called It Has to Be Read, which is a kind of a takeoff on my commentary I do on Substack and other places called It Has to Be Said. And we would like to include your book as our October book club offering, which would mean we would promote it, but talk about it, but also make it part of the book club, which gets more people's reacting to the book. I hope that's okay with you.
That is absolutely, that's great. That's great news.
Yeah. And let me get to something that you say in the book that I just want to go to here. You talk about, as author and professor Carrie P. Freeman explains, quote, the goal of any social movement is not to pull oneself up to be better than someone else and earn privileges at their expense, end quote, but to dismantle oppressive hierarchies and worldviews that have enabled widespread injustice of many types of living beings. And you, at another place in the book, that's I think, I forget what page that's on, but anyway, at another place in the book, you talk about, you use the word patriarchy in the same sentence as also describing some of the other oppression that people face. One thing I just want to note, I love the way in the book you tie animal rights to other rights. You tie what I would call empathetic sensitivity to the sense of belonging to a community of creatures globally, rather than just this omnipotent human position above all. I like the way you bring in child rights, marital rights, oppression of women, etc. You know, far too often from my background of an evangelical growing up, it was, well, human beings are important. Animals are there to serve us. They're part of the creation we've been given domination over. They kind of rate as second rate. You know, just to get personal for a minute, I had polio when I was 2. I have an atrophied left leg, a foot that, excuse the language, but I often refer to it, you know, that looks like a fucking claw. It's deformed. I have a little dog named Zip, a little rescue that I got 8 years ago. Zip sleeps in my bed. Zip hates being cold. All winter long, that leg is cold. Zip crawls over that leg and warms me. I never taught him to do it. Then he crawls off to get a warmer place he wants. Zip is as important to me, and I know this will sound crazy, as anybody out there. And Zip's cognition and sense of belonging to the community of my family is one of the things that actually shapes the way I treat my grandchildren, because Zip's like a sort of a little prophet of kindness and has learned to be part of us, but not because Zip was trained, but because Zip is a little ambassador from the whole animal kingdom to me, saying, this is how it should be. And I know that sounds sentimental, but that's the framework through which I read your book. And I love it because basically you've given me one long footnote on my relationship that's 8 years old with this fantastic little creature.
And many agree with you. Animals, in fact, the public cares deeply for animals. We've gotten, to know other animals in the animal kingdom through our relationships with companion animals.
Yeah.
And we're discovering that things that are good for us and good for animals actually go hand in hand. The way we treat animals in our habitats has direct consequences for humanity, whether it's
Yeah.
climate change, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and species extinction. Our actions towards the animal kingdom have profound consequences for each of us every single day. So,
Yeah, you have sorry, I cut you off. Please continue.
and the public feels strongly about animals, especially in the United States. I mean, there's instant after instant when social media posts have exposed animal cruelty and abuse, and the public demands justice, even though our laws are not quite there yet. The public is horrified. They take to social media, they call their representatives, they demand people be fired, they cancel. The cancel culture is in full force when it comes to protecting animals in the United States. It's just that our laws are not quite there yet.
Yeah, you write, let's see, what page is this? On page 178, you say, like humans, animals have certain inalienable rights, such as the right to bodily integrity and the right to be free. These rights exist even if they are not recognized or respected by humans. As humans, we share 98.8% of our DNA sequence with chimpanzees, 96.9% with orangutans, 90% with cats, 85% with mice, 84% with dogs, 80% with cows. But legal systems do not recognize the basic rights to freedom, equality, and dignity of animals, nor do they recognize species-specific rights, such as the right of dolphins to have plastic-free oceans. So that sort of reflects a little more of how your book reads when you get down into the specifics. What are we up against when it comes to why we are still so, we have this emotional response and people go online, right and left, and react to cruelty. But then at the same time, when you look at the law, which is your expertise, where are we on that chart? If you go back, say, when there to periods when there is bear baiting in Elizabethan pits and torture of animals for public amusement, okay, that's then. And that's a big chunk of human history of all religions and backgrounds, unfortunately. And then you get up to the present when you get canceled if you're found throwing a puppy into a dumpster, to look at a recent example I saw online. Okay, so that's a progression, that's a change. But if you look at how the law itself defends or recognizes the rights of animals, as you described them in that little bit I just read, where are we on that? If it, is it 10 to midnight? Are we halfway there? Are we going?
And
how do you see it?
In some countries, they pass laws and public relations campaigns follow. So laws are improved for animals, they're reformed, and the public is then taught to accept them. In the United States, it's the other way around. For example, California's Prop 12 was widely accepted in California by a large majority. It just gave a tiny, tiny bit more space for animals otherwise doomed for slaughter. Same in Massachusetts, question 3. Probably when you take into account puppy mills, kitten factories, all the farm animal progressive legislation, we're talking about millions of people have dedicated at least 1 million hours, if not more, trying to get tiny little laws that just help improve the lives a little bit. So what happens in the US? Right now we have a farm bill in front of Congress. It takes one congressperson in a very highly politicized and marginalized Congress to introduce a piece of legislation like the EATS Act. That legislation, which is now in front of Congress, it's put into the Farm Bill, which is thousands of pages, which would be very hard for attorneys to read, let alone non-attorneys. And that would essentially undo every single progressive law in the United States. Puppy mill legislation, which is always supported by any jurisdiction where it comes up for a vote, thrown out. California's Prop 12 thrown out. Massachusetts question 3 thrown out. One person backed by just a few special interest politicians or leaders can undo the work of millions of people in the United States. And that is primarily the problem, because there's a disconnect with how strongly and passionately the public feels about these measures. These initiatives are very, very popular, and they're always overwhelmingly supported by the public. The Greyhound Racing Act in Florida, 80% supported getting rid of dog racing in Florida. It just takes one piece of legislation stuck into a massive bill in Congress to undo everything. And
Well,
that's
what can be done about that, and what specific are you talking about? And then another part, and I don't want to take you places you don't want to go, because I know that your heart is in a lobbying effort, and you don't want to probably alienate people. But it just seems to me, I would describe myself as a pretty liberal person. I would vote Democrat. It would seem to me that there would be a direct overlap, just like there is with child abuse and animal abuse. I think there's a direct overlap with what I would call the kind of non-democratic approach to the gun lobby, where 80% of the American people don't want 100 round capacity magazines and bump stocks. But when it comes to legislation, you have this small gun lobby minority of legislators who never will do anything except do the will of this multi-million-dollar gun lobby that keeps playing. I mean, I see a direct relationship with that. To cut to the chase, it seems to me that the Democratic Party on this issue is better in reflecting the actual general will of even most Republicans in places like Florida and red states that don't take to seeing animals tortured. How does that balance in the present? I mean, we're in an election year, so when you're talking about one legislator holding everything up, what are we talking about?
It's very difficult, because the Biden administration actually had their administration petition the Supreme Court to overturn California's Prop 12, which would be a terrible result for farm animals. In reality, no party in the United States adequately protects animals in the way that they should be. No politician, no country adequately protects animals in the way they should be. I mean, you have countries like Iran that have zero laws to protect animals. You have countries like Switzerland that is supposed to be among the best. But even in Switzerland, 500,000 animals perished in 2019. Yeah. Every system, every political party, every religion, every culture, they all fail animals.
Who in the U.S., to get specific, and I don't mean the name and address and where their kids go to school. I'm not being vengeful here, but what is the force in America? If you could name one thing, is it the farm lobby? Is it the big food industry? Who puts the dollars behind the lobbying that torpedoes things that have popular support when it comes to treating animals? I'm not asking about the political party or the name of the legislator, but what, in America, you have the gun lobby, the NRA. If you want to know why, gun regulation founders, we know who the bad guys are in that, if that's your point of view. So what is the lobby in America that doesn't want cows treated better, that doesn't want a pig to have space to feed its young rather than caging it so it can't move? Even if you accept eating of meat and so forth and so on, once animals treated well, who stands up, pays good American dollars to knock down even the most minor humane regulation?
It is big ag. It is, without a doubt, it's big ag. It's industrialized animal agriculture. With California's Prop 12, which was passed with overwhelmingly support of the California people, they have spent decades, at least a solid decade, litigating. When you can't win on the merits, the oldest trick in the legal book is to bury someone in litigation, and that's exactly what they did with California Prop 12, and nonprofits had to scramble to even be able to have the money to fight the legal battles. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that it was constitutional on Commerce Clause grounds. So litigation is weaponized in the United States. Whenever there is a progressive law that is tended just to give a little bit more space or comfort or mercy to animals, it is buried in litigation. It happens time and time again. And not only that, states are passing laws that are anti-whistleblower in nature. In some states, they even have laws that you can't even take a job if your intent is to go in and photograph animal cruelty. So instead of laws protecting animals, they go against whistleblowers. And at least in North Carolina, laws can be so broad that they would prohibit whistleblowing in places like daycares or in elderly institutions, which is just a horrific result.
Yeah, I mean, once you go down this path of dehumanization to protect commerce at all costs, and the GDP is all that matters, and the farmer profits and big ag, then of course, like you do with animal cruelty impacting domestic abuse, these things are related because you've created an insensitive society that doesn't want to see or hear
And
if
they
it
have a
affects
market,
commerce.
they have market values of trillions of dollars if you take into account the individual companies. Now,
Yeah.
states are passing their own measures. There are states that have banned battery cages for chickens and extreme confinement of veals and calves. But it's probably like a fifth of the states now have measures in place against the extreme confinement. But it's a global trend. I mean,
Mm.
the major trading partners of the United States are enacting much more progressive animal welfare reforms in the US. The US is absolutely lagging behind its major trading partners, and that needs to
Yeah.
change.
Well, we tend to be extreme in a lot of areas, and including extreme cruelty in the way our major agribusiness is set up. I have a question for you. Just trying to get a feeling again of where we are on this clock of progress or not. When you look at this technique of endless stalling and litigation, of course, we've seen this play with the way the tobacco industry operated for 40 or 50 years. Once awareness grew from ads on TV telling you that cigarettes are good for you, all the way through to now being banned. And we've seen this play in the seesaw back and forth with the gun lobby, kind of in the more present tense. Having seen this operate before as a legal expert yourself, can we draw hope from the fact that if you had told somebody in 1947 or 1955 that there would come a time when there would be less smokers and cigarettes would be regarded as something rather uncool to smoke, by young people, they might not have believed you. And if you said there'll be no more ads on TV, sometimes I watch Formula One Grand Prix racing, and of course there's no, it used to all be Marlboro on the cars. And now, it's energy companies, which may be just as bad in terms of global warming, but we've seen change in areas where you wouldn't have thought of that. You've been around enough. America's behind in this. How do you foresee this going? What do you think is going to be happening?
Well, I mean, I think there's cause for optimism. In the last 2 decades, there has been tremendous reforms in the United States, although they have been at the state and local levels. But part of my book was to not just to tell the story of the various animals and various industries, but also to document how many laws are changing
Yeah.
on the globe. I mean, in Italy, you cannot put a lobster on ice in a restaurant because it causes undue suffering.
Mm.
More and more governments are coming out and they're recognizing that animals are sentient, that they suffer, and the laws should be better. The United
Yeah.
States is behind the curve, but things are starting to happen. We are at the very, very beginning of animal law. Like I said, 3 decades ago, people would say, animal law, what is that? Animals are property in the story. But
Yeah.
it is absolutely changing. So I think as more and more states and localities are starting to enact anti-cruelty provisions,
Mm.
I think we'll get there. I think in the United States, it's particularly challenging because we have weak laws to start with. The Humane Slaughter Act doesn't cover 98% of the animals that are slaughtered for food. We have fundamental problems with laws at the federal level, and the states, one by one, are starting to plug
Mm.
in the holes. But it's always a challenge because the laws themselves are always challenged.
Yeah.
There is a reason to be optimistic, but it's part of the reason for the book was to explain, yes, animals are intelligent, sentient, we love them, we should do better, but it's also in our interest to treat them better. I mean, there's
Yeah,
not.
absolutely. Yeah, and it's in our interest in so many ways. If selfish human interest is all we've got, which let's hope that's not the case, but nevertheless, the correlation you show and prove in statistical numbers between animal cruelty and the kind of pathological behavior of molesters, children, and these other people, it's there. Let me just reintroduce you. I'm Frank Schaeffer. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, my podcast. We're live on YouTube, and my guest is someone I really admire because I admire her book, and I believe passionately in what she's doing, and that's Kimberly C. Moore. And Kimberly is a nationally recognized tax attorney, director of public relations for the Fur Free Society Incorporated, and has worked on state legislation to ban the sale and manufacture of fur. Appointed as a fellow by the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics for outstanding contribution to the field of animal ethics worldwide, and author of a book that we're talking about, and I have notes from that I'm interviewing Kim on, The Case for the Legal Protection of Animals, Humanity's Shared Destiny with the Animal Kingdom. And I would ask you to please subscribe to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Apple Podcasts, and to my Substack, It Has to Be Said, where I do commentaries, by the way, on animal rights at times, and would hope that we'll be talking a lot about this book because it's our October offering for our book club. It has to be read. And Kimberly, one thing I would like to ask you about here is just diving back into the book itself for a moment. You talk about ultimately the greatest impact of affording animals legal rights would be a personal one. It would force each of us to consider why humanity inflicts such tremendous suffering on animals and how our own actions contribute to that suffering. And that's on page 297, nearer to the conclusion of the book. So let's just talk about that for a little bit. People don't like to feel judged. We push back when we're made to feel badly. But on the other hand, if there's not an element of conscience here in terms of doing harm to creatures over which we have dominion, then I think everything goes out the window. Then what's the argument for not being a racist? What's the argument for not being a misogynist? Why not abuse a child? I think you have every right to talk about our conscience and to put it in bleak terms, every right to judge the behaviors that lead to this. In your own experience of being out there and speaking about these things, whether it's in, Oxford or university or somewhere else, or just to people, how do you feel that, we have this huge, big sort of online thing against shaming, but on the other hand, I'm sorry, but we should be ashamed of the fact that as Americans, our country is a laggard in defending the rights of these creatures. In the same way, we should be ashamed of any kind of oppressive, disgusting behavior. So how do you state your case without making people feeling shamed and therefore turned off? I'm talking more from a pragmatic point of view than I am the principle involved. But I know you must run into this because you're in discussions with people, some of whom must object to the fact that, to put it bluntly, you're judging them. You're saying, hey, when you slaughter an animal this way, it suffers. You're doing this. You're making billions of dollars out of getting away with this. Shame on you.
Yeah, we are challenging, people who are advocating for better conditions for animals are challenging traditions, culture, religion, political identities. There is, however, there's ways for improving. I know my vegan friends can be incredibly passionate and they care deeply about animals. Part of that is because they are likely, they're going through the mourning process. The
Sure.
world they thought doesn't exist like that. There's a tremendous amount of cruelty that we see each and every day. And so people are angry and frustrated and sad, and it often comes out like that. But I think in, bigger picture, the public, I think, is much more receptive to cruelty-free options. And I just point to plant-based meats and non-animal proteins that are literally a revolution in their own. Billion-dollar industries are cropping up just because people, when they think about it, they want no part in cruelty. And it's a learning process. It's humane education. I didn't always know that fur was cruel. My first coat out of high school was for my grandmother. I had fur trim. I now use that for wildlife rescue. And I think, there should be a sensitivity in exposing people to these realities. And I think that, there may be some initial pushback, but I think over time, most people don't want any part of cruelty. If there's an option, better option, and there should be better options. We shouldn't be spending billions of dollars to subsidize the meat and dairy industry. We should be subsidizing proteins that are healthier for the environment and for people. But the public is not waiting for laws to change. The public is demanding. In fact, that is driving the changes in the United States, massive changes in food, in fashion, in entertainment. Remember, Ringling Brothers was forced out of business in 2017 because the public had just had it with seeing wild animals in circuses. I mean,
Sure.
more than 50 other nations and hundreds of territories within nations have said no more wild animals in circuses. We haven't gotten there in the United States. We have a handful of states that have banned the use of wild animals in circuses, but at the congressional level, I like to say Congress is the place where good laws go to die. There's legislation right now on a host of animal issues that are widely supported by upwards of 80% of the public that are just stalled in Congress. So yeah, I mean, vegans can definitely be very aggressive, but they are fighting, what they're fighting is, trillions of dollars worth of company value that are making their livelihood and their business
Sure.
on the backs of animals. So I understand the frustration. I feel it myself on a daily basis. But there are ways where we can educate the public in the right way. And of course, no one tactic will work with any single person. That's why, there's a variety of people who are helping animals different ways, and that's really what animals need.
Yeah, it seems to me that, given the situation we have in the US where you have a certain fervent element of the public is very religious in their practice, less religion than there used to be, but nevertheless, you have this quote here. Let's see what page it's on, from page 125, 26. Religion has been used throughout history to justify the continued abuse and exploitation of animals, but most religions united in their creed, if not their practice, that we show compassion to animals. And then you give examples from Buddhism and Hinduism. You talk about Judaism and Roman Catholic Church, the Pope, and so forth and so on. But it seems to me that the point you bring up is very apropos of political change in terms of the fact that, I think DeSantis or somebody just made using what they call fake meat illegal or something, or trying to.
Yes.
But when you look at the voting public, let's just say he's put back in power by religious people on the religious right. I think there's an appeal there that can be made to people of religious belief based in their own traditions on this. And you talk about that.
Of course.
So go there a little bit in terms of tactically speaking, recognizing that we have quite a few religious people in America on both the left and the right who look at their religion for inspiration on ethical concerns. That's a very good section of your book, and you give good examples. And I would urge people, say again, we're going to put this in our October book club, and I would love you all to read the book. But let's talk about religion a little bit and your own experiences of trying to pitch this idea to people. I mean, how have you done with evangelicals, Roman Catholics, Jews, and others? You must have had experience. Can you talk about that?
Of course, yes. I mean, the teachings of Christ are mercy, compassion, taking into account others. I mean, there's strong religious there's strong reasons to be kind and to be merciful to animals. I mean, the fact that we have such food insecurity at this 2024, we have millions of people that lack even clean water and food. I mean, we're talking about a food system that caters to the very wealthy and the rich in the first world at the detriment of billions of people around the planet. And so, what would Christ say in that situation? Show mercy.
Not to mention deforestation of huge chunks of the Amazon, which basically means the lungs that provide the air we all breathe, rich and poor alike, are being decimated by an agribusiness globally that is essentially destroying our planet to raise meat. And we know that. That's a fact. That's not a hyperbolic kind of claim.
Yes.
So that, we've got all sorts of survival issues mixing in with ethical issues, which is to say, that Kim's book here that we're talking about, put it this way, it's like flying over a big railroad junction where, 1,000 tracks come together. There's so much in your book. And the essence of your book is about animal rights, but then food safety, planetary destruction, the Amazon forest being cut down. It seems if you had to name great villains in our present moment of history, the agribusiness lobby and the way this is being done would be one of them. I happen to have a grown grandson, Ben, who lives in upstate New York and manages 3 regenerative farms where they're trying to take land that's been abused. The land has been so abused by the agribusiness that people have bought these farms to just try to bring back the ability of the earth, the water, and the plants to function again. And he's got animals ranging over them, and they're planting more trees, and they're in this so that, I have a kind of a family involvement in tangentially with Ben. But his argument is even moral and ethical. It's practical. It's how many more harvests do you want? Because this way lies death and madness when it comes to what agribusiness is actually just doing to the land. Forget
Absolutely.
the ethics of how the animals are treated. So you have so much going on in your book. Bring some of those threads in, because let's broaden this out, because I just was fascinated by how many tracks come into this station.
Well, it really is all connected. And going back to your Christian audience, I mean, who did Christ spend his time with? He didn't spend his time with kings and great leaders. He put himself amidst the poor. And so when you think about, tenets of religion, what can I do to make the world better for people and animals? It really comes down to not exploiting, like you say, the land. Who's going to be harmed? It's going to be the poor. It's going to be people in countries that face water scarcity. And we have a migration issue now at our borders.
Yeah.
In time, it's just going to get worse. I mean, climate change is going to make some places uninhabitable. There's going to be places where people choose not to live because of extreme weather events. We're seeing weather events like we have not seen in the history of us being on the planet. We are seeing record after record being broke in the last 3 years. We've had the hottest year on record, the hottest month on record. We've seen more CO2 in our atmosphere than we've seen in millions of years. And what's driving this? Well, in part, it's deforestation, because trees and plants take vast amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need trees, we need plants. And countries are starting to recognize that. There are international initiatives that have very ambitious goals to stop deforestation over a certain percentage of the planet within, the next 7 or 8 years. Very aggressive. Now, whether or not they're funded and people stick to it, enforcement is always an issue with reforms. But it really comes down to, what are we doing to make the world is already a very difficult place.
Yeah.
What can I do individually to help mitigate the pain and suffering that people and animals are going to face from issues like climate change? And certainly loss of biodiversity is another global threat. Zoonotic diseases. We just had the worst pandemic in a century. We've spent trillions of dollars on one single virus that mutates and will likely come back again. Why? It's because of our interference with animals and their habitats. Now, whether it was a wet market or the Wuhan Institute of Biology, it doesn't matter. It's still animal-based. And so as we encroach on animals in their habitats, we're going to see more and more of these zoonotic diseases.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to read another quote here, but it just seems to me so much of what you say is almost like the bill is coming due in this generation. If we don't see it now, with everything that's interrelated with global warming, and which relates directly to the way our agriculture functions and the way we treat animals, we'll never see it. I mean, I'm optimistic in the sense that your book is not being launched into a vacuum. It's being launched into a screaming, crying need for a rethink on these things. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the time is right. I mean, I think there's an impression in the United States that we have great laws. I mean, we're a nation built on laws. My tax practice, I could show you 4 feet of laws on tax and regulations and so forth. But we're missing the mark when it comes to animals. The United States imports more wildlife parts than the second country, which is China, by tenfold. We're the only country that has wildlife killing contests. We kill tens of thousands of animals just for sport. I call them blood sports. I mean, there's a lot of things in the United States that happen against animals that are not done in other countries. And the United States is one of the last countries to not have chimpanzees in laboratories. Now, the NIH has moved away from using primates in research, but as of as late as 2019, we still had 60,000 primates in research labs in the United States. I mean, that's unheard of. That is
Yeah.
absolutely unheard of. Other countries have laws, the right to a healthy environment. The United Nations just passed a resolution a few years ago that says, hey, healthy environment, animals, and humans are all connected. We can't look at one in a vacuum without the other. So, I mean, there is a perception that the United States is a tremendous power. We have a bunch of laws, but when it comes to protecting the environment and animals, we are far behind the curve, and that was part of the reason for the book.
Yeah, one of the things you write that's very related to this, and again, shows the price we pay in areas where people perhaps not involved in animal rights would say they're involved, like, for instance, the rights of human children. Peer-reviewed studies document the impact of violence to animals as a, quote, adverse childhood experience with long-term effects on the developing brain. When someone commits animal cruelty, it is thought that their empathy is likely distorted or inhibited, making it easier to disregard the feelings and lives of other animals and humans. Research indicates that a person may become desensitized to abuse or violence if they witness it. And there's so many cases. You have all sorts of statistics. That's page 218 or 19. You have so many statistics that bear that out. And again, you know, I don't see how you can compartmentalize brutality. If we don't care enough to make laws about animals, then it would seem to me that you would find something someone does care about. And if you're going to have hunting competitions to slaughter just for the hell of it, and this is fine, and then turn around and say, yeah, but when it comes to slapping a child to death, or when it comes to becoming a mass murderer, or when it comes to a school shooting, that's where we draw the line. It's not so easy. You know, that's not how we human beings work. When we brutalize ourselves in any area into desensitivity, then, you know, we pay a price. So I think you have a very powerful argument there if you just want to talk a little more about that.
Yes, violence definitely begets more violence.
Yeah.
And violence towards animals, it just dehumanizes the sanctity of life. And the FBI agrees with that. In 2017, for the first time in history, they started tracking cases of animal abuse because they do tie directly to other cases, child abuse, domestic violence. There are peer-reviewed research papers after peer-reviewed research papers that just show a consistent and undeniable claim that violence against animals leads to violence against humans. Even in recent school shootings, they've gone back to look at the history of the individual who brought the atrocity, and they find that that individual has issues with animal cruelty in their past. And so states are recognizing that. They have so-called cross-reporting laws now. So if an animal control person goes to a home and they see child abuse, that gets reported directly to social workers, and vice versa. If social workers go and they see animal cruelty, that's reported to the animal control. So there is a growing recognition. I mean, my goodness, we are beyond even disputing that. We should be doing everything we can to prevent animal cruelty. But we've come a long way when it comes to cats and dogs, but what we haven't gotten to is institutionalized cruelty.
Yeah.
So we see animals on factory farms being branded, hot brands, chickens, their beaks are cut off. I mean, you name it, animals endure horrific suffering on factory farms, and it's perfectly legal because anti-cruelty laws exempt standard farm practices. And so there's a tremendous amount of suffering, and it is violence. I mean, it's sanctioned by the state, it's law, but it's violence. And that feeds more violence as that becomes public. It's just
but what can be done on this? Because I'm just zeroing in on the cruelty to animals, whether it's, you know, clipping the beaks off a chicken or this kind of a thing. How do we make people understand that, you know, the dog that they've got sleeping in their bed or the cat that curls up on the windowsill, you know, there's a connection between the dog you love that you take hunting with you on a competition to kill other animals and the animals you're killing. So it's very strange. It's somehow, you know, in the same way that, you know, there's how do we make the jump from the people we love in our own family and then extend that concern to other families, sort of broaden the empathy? I mean, you're spending your life trying to do this. You know, when you look at the big time agricultural business that lobbies to get everything rescinded that would modify in the slightest their level of profit in favor of an animal, you know, how do you make a crack in that dam emotionally so people will respond, but then go further than that? Because you're saying most people's hearts are in the right place when it comes to these issues. How do you connect that with legislation that does not fail because of this one guy that stands up and buries something in a bill that will undo everything? How can we stop that and become like other more rational countries that deal with these issues and don't let one guy from XYZ lobby screw it all up?
Well, it's a very important question. I mean, some countries have closed circuit television in their slaughterhouses, at least 4 countries I can think off the bat. But I think in the US, industry does a fantastic job of keeping cruelty out of public sight. I mean, they spend millions of dollars to make sure we don't learn what's happening on factory farms, and they have their politicians who pass laws that make illegal whistleblowing and taking photographs of cruelty. And so we have a tough go in the United States because industries have so much power. And of all times in our nation's history, I mean, we are promoting democracy overseas to the tune of billions of dollars. We should be doing everything we can to set the example of what a true democracy is, which is laws governed by the people. But when we have one legislator who can add a tiny provision in a 1,000-page farm bill that would undo the will of millions of people in millions of hours, that's not a democracy. That's an oligarchy. I mean, that's the $60 million question in the US when it comes to protecting animals. How do we rein in industries that have so much power? They have billions that they could just bury any state law in litigation, and that's exactly what they've done. And that is the question. How do we stop that? I mean, I think part of it is a public that is becoming increasingly wary of cruelty. And they're seeing that, you know, our encroachment on animals and their habitats are having profound consequences, not just for you know, people's daily lives, but also with the environment. I mean, didn't we just recently hear bird flu has now been found on factory farms?
Sure.
Factory farms are notoriously horrific for the environment, but they're also cesspools, petri dishes for future zoonotic.
Well, and they've worked hard to not be regulated by anybody.
Well, I read a statistic, 12,900 people die from air pollution from factory farms in the United States, and the EPA actually exempts factory farms from reporting on their air pollution. So, I mean, go to any rural area in North Carolina and you'll find people with respiratory illnesses who live close to those the hog farms in North Carolina. And there's been research papers on this. This is not a surprise, but politicians still support, you know, these farms and protect them from, you know, environmental accountability.
I have a question that is apropos of just, you know, what do we do about this? That reflects a sort of generational difference. It seems to me, observing this, you know, from afar, as it were, just unscientifically, that generationally speaking, there is a vast American public against animal cruelty. Then the legislators torpedo the laws. You have this one guy, or a state like Texas or Florida, wherever, in hoc to the farm industry, you know, more open on a political basis, you know, kind of anti-woke or something. And then that becomes another excuse to do things that have nothing to do with woke or anything else. They go way back in human perception into ancient religions, even that predate the whole modern era, where there are laws against animal cruelty. But it seems to me that you'd be in a good position to give us a little report from the field, as it were, on generational differences, where the future obviously belongs to younger people. I'm 72. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my grandchildren. And it seems to me, from what I observe, that generationally speaking, past the left-right divide, younger people are going to be even less into animal cruelty as being somehow okay.
They absolutely are. I mean, China is one of the largest producers and users of fur, but you can see that generational division in China, Young people in China don't wear fur, and they're absolutely against cruelty because they see what an animal has to undergo for that coat to be made. So, I mean, I think, and also think that the younger generation is much more technologically savvy than the rest of us. You think about cellular agriculture, in a world where there are billions of people who are food insecure, the promise of being able to take one cell from a turkey and to turn that into 20 trillion turkey nuggets. I mean, how wonderful would that be? I mean, who cannot support that type of technology?
Yeah.
It would save the environment. It would save animals from suffering. It would save humans from zoonotic diseases on factory farms. I definitely think that, our future is in good hands when it comes to the up and coming generation.
Yes.
Because every act of animal cruelty almost goes viral. If you think about all the, my book on the impact of social media and the media.
Sure.
I mean, take one act of animal cruelty and it goes viral.
Yeah.
And the public is horrified and they demand accountability. They demand jobs be lost. I think about that one influencer who had, 1 million followers, and she filmed herself kicking a dog.
Yeah.
She probably lost like 95% of her followers overnight because of that.
Yeah, or the governor of wherever who decides to shoot her dog because he, didn't hunt well or something.
Oh, Kristi Noem. Yes.
Yeah, Kristi Noem. That didn't go so well. Even in the Republican far right, she's dropped like a hot,
hot potato. You would think, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember Mitt Romney, who was running for president, and the story broke about him putting his dog on the roof of his car.
Sure.
I mean, how could anyone think that they could disclose shooting their dog?
Yeah, even in the present day, in the context of the Kristi Noem story, he was saying, well, wait a minute. That story with my dog was different. He liked being up there and I didn't kill anything.
Banks are definitely telling companies, that this so-called headline risk of animal abuse is a big business risk. And a lot of companies and banks they're moving away from, perceived instances of cruelty. Airlines no longer going or supporting SeaWorld. Companies pulling their support from, animal events that seem to be exploitive and cruel in nature. Businesses are moving far behind that line. They don't want anything to do with animal cruelty, which is another example of the public in the United States pushing laws and pushing.
Yeah, and it would seem to me when it gets into boycotting whole states and products made there, that when you have a state like Texas, which has legislated against changing the law on animal cruelty and vast amounts of meat produced there, feedlots and all the rest of it, that at a certain point, that insensitivity will not fly even within, say, the Republican Party, because all of a sudden things will be canceled in Texas. People are not going to go to a state that is famous for being crueler than the rest, meaner than the rest. So it would seem to me there's a little bit of a leverage there.
And even in the United States, 10% of the population is food insecure. So, it's not just overseas and other countries. I mean, we have our own food security issues in the US and water. We use, I think it was trillions and trillions of gallons in the United States of fresh water goes to factory farm animals to produce meat, for which I recently read an article, over 50% of the beef consumption is by 12% of the US population.
Yeah.
It always seems there's a tiny bit of the population. Trophy hunting is another example. A tiny, tiny few are basically causing so much of an adverse impact to the environment and to our reputation around the world.
Yeah, I just want to plug the book a little more and then get into another question. I get the title right here. Author of The Case for the Legal Protection of Animals, which is the title, and subtitle is Humanity's Shared Destiny with the Animal Kingdom. And the author is my guest, Kimberly Moore, who's a lawyer and passionate on this issue. And I would imagine in great demand by people who really want facts and not just conspiracy theories, because your book is laden with facts and footnotes and quotes and so forth. It's a wonderfully, wonderfully complete book. To the point, by the way, where I was making my little notes to interview you, and I almost made a little note saying, Kimberly scares me because she knows shit.
Well, this book is actually going to be marketed, but the publisher, Palgrave Macmillan, is an academic publisher.
Yes. I know.
When I made a decision about who to go with, publishing, I wanted to go with an academic because I wanted it to be taught in colleges, universities,
Sure.
law
And so it
schools
should
around the
be.
globe. Yep.
Yeah, but eventually it's got to come down price-wise where the rest of us can afford that. I was lucky because I got it from your publisher or whomever. But academic books are tough. But on the other hand, if you have the right people studying it, that then has a huge influence. So that's a good approach for this particular subject. I mean, what you really want is to get the leaders in this field more informed so they can go up against that one guy in Congress and see that he doesn't win his next election because he's into animal cruelty. Again, I've said this before in terms of all these roads that go into your book, but it seems to me that when we look at global warming and our environmental issues, that actually this relates directly. This is not a sentimental kind of, oh, I love little furry creatures, let's be nice. Okay, that's a good motivation. I feel that way. But it also, when it gets into agribusiness, it just so happens that for global warming and CO2 emissions and forest destruction and deforestation and the killing of land, the use of aquifers, the destruction of our water, pollution of the atmosphere, with the exception of the oil industry, there is no one that's doing more harm to the planet than the way we eat and the way we buy food and what our habits of eating are. This is not like, some extended thing that sort of relates. This is it. So the weird thing is, I have a thing I do in the context of a lot of my interviews, and I say, one of my watchwords is basically, you want to know about a country, the old thing that de Tocqueville used to say, go look at the prisons. I have another one, and that is, you really want to know about something, just ask one question and everything else will tie into it. And it's this: how do they treat women? Period. Because when it comes to racism or children's rights or education or the quality of medical care or how the poor are treated, you're not going to find a country where women are treated well and decently as full human beings, citizens with egalitarian rights, that then screws up on those things. And I really think that your book, and this is very bold, I'm going to add something to that. And that is, how does this culture treat animals? Because all roads converge at that point, including pollution and the death of our planet. So I've made a bold thing here, but is there any sense in this, Kimberly? Because I really believe that that's true.
I absolutely believe that. And sadly, all of these planetary crises are going to hit the poor hardest.
Yeah.
It is really, I mean, we talk a lot about wildlife and how populations are just plummeting. It is really, when you start looking at what we've done to our oceans, it is just horrific. I mean, from fishing lines that are miles long that drag along the bottom of oceans that, catch up to 10 to 40% of so-called bycatch, which is just animals that are not intended to be fish, but they're just caught up in the nets. I mean, global warming, dead zones, and then if all that is not, if pollution, marine plastic pollution, and dead zones are not enough, we have the U.S. Navy dropping 40-pound bombs in the Atlantic. It happened in 2021, and that was so horrific. It caused a 3.9 magnitude earthquake. I mean, and aquatic animals are the least like us.
Yes.
But so many communities depend on healthy oceans for their communities. And it's just horrific to see in real time the destruction of oceans. And we're seeing it every year in real time.
Yeah, and it's not a crime that is going to go unpunished. You can only screw with Mother Nature so long, and she's going to hit back really, really hard. And we're the generation that's getting hit. And these younger people who are more open to what you're saying see the future very clearly, it seems to me. I know with all this, it's very cool to be anti-woke. And even my liberal friends are saying, well, I don't want to say this in public, but privately, let me tell you this, because I'm sort of disturbed by this. And I hold back for a minute and just say, I'm sorry. We're going to be gone. We're handing this shipwreck over to people. Of course, their voices are loud. Of course, they are making demands. Of course, they want to cancel things that are coming in another direction. This is their future.
Of course.
And I really believe that about this issue. I don't advocate sort of violence, overthrow of governments and civil disobedience on a level that destroys property. But I must say that if we don't draw the line here, when you have the cruelty factor, the global factor, the environmental factor, my guest, Kimberly Moore, has written a book that literally is a life and death issue. This is it. So yeah, the oil industry and the energy problems and green energy are one thing, but will mean nothing if the animal cruelty situation is not addressed, because it correlates directly with the destruction of our planet. Not sentimentally. I mean, the air we breathe, the water we eat, the availability, the oceans rising as we cut all the forests down and so forth.
And the great news is that countries are seeing this connection. They're seeing
Not us.
not the United States. And part of the book is to say, hey, look at all these countries. The major trading partners of the United States are hidden in this direction. The United States is hidden in this direction. I mean, at some point, the US is just going to become an outlier. It really already is.
Yeah.
I mean, I always say, you know, one of the first vegan festivals I went to, I was, you know, manning the table, and a little lady came up to me and she said, I'll never forget it. She said, you tell us not to eat dogs and cats, but you guys are eating cows and pigs. What's the difference?
Yeah.
There is this perception, which is incredibly wrong, that the United States, that our laws are okay for animals, that all is well. All is not well for animals in the US.
No,
And
not at all. And
not at all.
we, you know, and we see, we just don't want to look at this. But like I say, we've seen this map before. We did it on race. We've done it on women. We did it on gay people. We've done it on the environment. Duck and cover, head in the sand, until almost the last second, when a huge percentage of your population is dying of lung cancer. And finally, someone says, maybe cigarettes aren't good for you. Let's take the commercials off the air and see if that doesn't change something. And I feel that way every time I see a commercial for a Jeep or a Land Rover ripping through the landscape and putting, you know, tire marks everywhere and tearing through streams. And, you know, one of the little bells that goes off of my head is, hey, you know, people live there. They're called, you know, they're called snakes and rabbits and fish. And what the hell are you doing out there tearing it up? I know that's a small example, but a country that is sensitive to just even loving the land you're on. You know, I have a lovely little patch of garden and I grow things. I don't want a Land Rover tearing through my garden.
And I understand that these are weighty issues. I mean, when we talk about planetary crises, you know, the first reaction is, oh my goodness, what can I do? There's nothing I can do. But the reality is, it just takes one person to say, you know what, I'm not going to support skin trades. You know, I'm not going to buy a fur coat. I'm not going to use exotic furs. I'm going to buy cruelty-free. And what is happening, which is just beautiful in the US, is that one person coming together with millions of other people are driving changes in the private sector. And the private sector is what's going to drive legal changes. Hopefully, eventually, sooner than later at the federal level, but currently mostly at the state and the federal level. And the changes are really transformative in terms of how far we've come in the last couple decades. I mean, I don't want to understate the amount of change that's happened in the United States.
Sure.
Big picture from a law perspective, it's revolutionary. It's just that we have so much further to go.
To do. Yeah. And so I'm going to wrap this up with a couple notes here. First of all, my guest, Kimberly, is a wonderful person who's doing something incredible with her life. So thank you. And you're the author of The Case for Legal Protection of Animals, subtitle Humanity's Shared Destiny, the Animal Kingdom. In October, this is our It Must Be Read book club offering. And I hope that when we do that, Kimberly, we can snag you again to come back and be part of a panel to talk about your book again.
I would love to.
Maybe with some other people who are like-minded and can also bring their perspective to the table. So would you come back and do that?
Of course, absolutely. 100%.
And the other favor I would ask you is, if I may, we're always looking for people who speak, you know, from position of knowledge and can articulate what they're saying. Obviously, you're connected with people. If you ever get an idea on a book, for instance, of a friend or someone coming out or an event, and you want to get us to help promote that in our tiny little neck of the woods, please email my producer, Ernie Gregg, and say, hey, listen, have you thought of so-and-so? You should interview her. She's got this incredible book on such and such coming out, or whatever. We want to know, and we want to book people who are talking about the things you're talking about, because we really care about this.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. So please pass on good knowledge and contacts to us. And let me just tell you again, I salute you. I thank you. People who think this way are thirsty for real information. And you know, you've provided it. I mean, you've written a really amazingly well-researched document. I'm not scared of you anymore because now we're friends. But your mind explodes through the pages as one of the brightest and most put together people I've ever encountered on the page. You're an amazing human.
I appreciate that. And I would just say all profits to the book go to Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. I am not claiming one penny. I'll be the last person to exploit an animal for a book. So this was just a true work of passion for the animal kingdom.
Well, I really appreciate this, and we will talk to you again. Thanks so much. Tell Ernie anything that we can do to help promote what you're doing. We'll put it out there.
I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.